A lot of people think macro is a very technical form of photography where you strive to get everything in focus or need powerful flash lighting and fancy gear. But it doesn't have to be like that. Macro can literally be enjoyed like a walk in the park. This video will look at creative macro photography and we'll be shooting with the S series 100mm f2.8 macro, but everything we're doing could also be done on your G9 Mark II with the 45mm macro instead. There's lots of good macro lenses out there. A good macro lens for me means it has a good autofocus. That's my starting point for creative macro work. And after that, I just need some interesting subjects and maybe a little sunshine. Obviously, the first thing I'm going to focus on for this video is the choice of lens. Macro lenses are special because they let you magnify the subject much more than a regular lens can. They focus closer. And here we have the S series 100mm f2.8. If you're trying to capture things like bees or butterflies, then the speed of the autofocus becomes really important. This lens is a little bit special because it has dual motors to drive the autofocus, which means you're not only getting great response when you're shooting macro, but you're getting great performance when you're not shooting macro. This lens is really good for things like festivals or for working with bands and live gigs. Your baseline for shooting with macro may vary depending on whether you're shooting flowers or things like bees. Bees move really fast, and even the flowers will drift in the wind. So you don't necessarily want too slow a shutter speed. I like to work at about 1/800th of a second, and I save that in as the minimum shutter speed when I'm shooting aperture priority. I let the camera use auto ISO so it can adjust the ISO as required to get the exposure correct. One other feature that's really worth getting to know on these cameras is the near focus for your autofocus. You can customize any of your buttons to deliver the near focus response. And all that means is it will move towards you instead of away from you. The near focus AF is a really great feature to get to know. One of the challenges with macro photography is that very small movements by you or your subject can simply blow it out of focus. You have a very shallow depth of field, and if you're pushing f2.8, it is as shallow as it gets. So one of the tricks I employ to help me get the shot is to use the continuous burst mode on the drive dial. My standard procedure is to get a focus lock, then push forward or back, or maybe both, through the subject while the continuous burst is still rolling. I'm not just taking one shot at a time, I'm taking a set of shots. I might take 10 shots instead of one. One of those shots is going to have the ideal focus. As a professional, I don't show everyone my bad shots, I just show them the good ones. All of this can be saved into one of your custom settings on the camera so that it is ready to go when you need it. The major element to creative macro photography, though, is going to be the light. And I like working with available light. I like the natural light. I like the character that it brings. So when I'm walking through the botanical gardens, I'm not just looking for subjects to shoot, but I'm looking for where the light is doing something interesting. If I'm going to shoot flowers, I want that sun coming in behind it and maybe even illuminating some of the colors of the petals. I love a little bit of backlighting. One of the tricks to finding interesting light and interesting compositions when you're shooting at f2.8 is simply shooting through layers. You're not just taking a picture of a flower, you're taking a picture of a flower surrounded by other flowers. You can take pictures of a fern leaf, but through other fern leaf, and you're getting depth, you're getting layers of subjects coming through. The out of focus bits add something to the composition and they emphasize the beautiful bits that are in focus. There are lots of other lenses that will get you close to the macro range. Some of the telephotos, for example, might give you like a 1:3 macro ratio, and that's pretty good, and that can be beautiful for flowers too. But if you want to get really, really close, there's nothing quite like a macro lens. One of the joys of shooting with a dedicated macro lens is you can get in really, really close and get those super tight moments, but you have that flexibility to step back and move through a range. You might not always be shooting within the macro range, you might just be getting very close. Or sometimes you might want a wider context of where your subject is. You can do a lot with a macro lens, not just macro. Regardless of what lens you're using to go and chase some flowers or bees, the number one creative tool you have for your photography is light. So paying attention to the light, where it's coming in from, where it's doing something interesting, that will definitely help your macro photography. I really hope this has been useful for you today, and I hope it inspires you to get out there and to think about the local gardens that you might have, or even what's in your own backyard. Have a great day.